Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of the top 10? Top 10 male wrestlers for 2022. If you've been following along, we've been doing a best of 22 on our top 10s here. We skipped last week so I could do a Thanksgiving themed one, but we're continuing on, and on this one we're talking about the top 10 male wrestlers. Let's jump right in. Number 10. Fred Rosser. If you've been watching my New Japan Pro Wrestling Strong reviews, you'll see how impressed I've been with Fred Rosser and his rise to being the champion there, and how great of a year I think he's had. His chase of the championship, his feud with Team Filthy, specifically Tom Lawler, how he's carried himself after becoming the champion. I think he's absolutely the highlight of the show, one of the great reasons why I tune into it every week. One of the great wrestlers who I really think is stamping his name as being a top talent in all the world. His, by far, in my opinion, his best year in his career so far. Thought he was absolutely fantastic. Now going from Fred Rosser, our number 9, Bron Breakker. A guy who spent most of his years as the face of NXT 2.0, and even carrying over when they lost to 2.0. Braun, to me, is the most can't-miss talent in all of wrestling. If he's not a WrestleMania main eventer in the very near future, I'm saying as early as 2024, WWE has really messed up because they have a can't-miss guy on their hands here. He's already one of the better wrestlers that they have, already one of the most compelling wrestlers that they have, hence why you see him here on the list. I think he's absolutely outstanding. Our number 8, coming from the land of Impact, Josh Alexander. It could be argued that Josh Alexander from bell to bell is the best wrestler in the world. He's not had a bad match all year. He's carried that banner in Impact Wrestling and made himself one of their historic champions there. He's one of the guys that you tune into that show every week for. And a lot of people kind of forget that Impact's out there. It's on a smaller cables channel. Their pay-per-views don't get a lot of buys, but if you watch it, it's a really good wrestling show. And a lot of the reason are guys like Josh Alexander, guys like Chris Bay, Speedball Mike Bailey, the women's division. Impact Wrestling, I think, has the best women's division in all of wrestling. Everyone from Deonna Purrazzo to Jordan Grace to Rosemary to everybody in their women's roster is absolutely fantastic. It feels kind of like Josh Alexander to Impact is what Nick Aldis had been for a few years to the NWA, meaning that he was the guy and the unquestioned guy in the company. I think he had a fantastic year, hence why he made our list. Now, our number 7, probably the guy with the most losses on this list this year, Seth freaking Rollins. Seth has taken what was already a legendary career, a Hall of Fame career, and took it and put it on another level. Seth, in his own way, reminds me of Randy Macho Man Savage. He's putting on great wrestling matches in the ring. He has great feuds with just about everybody he steps between the ropes with. His interviews and his fashion sense are so compelling that if he did nothing else but come out and talk and dance with the crowd singing his song, that would be the highlight of most WWE shows. And that's saying something about one of the guys that's probably in the short list for best in-ring talents that there is in the world. Seth had a fantastic year, and he'd probably be higher on the list if he was a more high-profile champion. I do take into effect how people are considered on their card, not just how I feel about them in their matches. For that reason, Seth's a little bit lower than probably he could be. There's a lot of years where Seth could be the number 1 guy, and if he would have had a world championship run or two, he might have been the number 1 on this list. Now going from that, our number 6. Another guy who in a lot of years would be a number 1 or number 2 on this list, Kazuchika Okada. To me, it says a lot if I have a list and we're talking about the top male wrestlers in the world, and Kazuchika Okada is all the way down at number 6. I mean, this guy is an absolute legend. When it's all said and done, he may be the best wrestler in the history of New Japan Pro Wrestling, and it can be argued he's already at that point. He set record after record, had great matches after great matches, by any stretch of the means. Whether you listen to the Meltzer scale, whether you listen to anybody else that watches his matches, he's had more high-rated matches than anybody I could think of. You want to talk about Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair, Daniel Bryan, Bryan Danielson, Seth Rollins I just mentioned, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, I did mention Steamboat already, Randy Savage. None of them have had as many highly regarded matches as Kazuchika Okada. And this year he continued on that trajectory. The reason I put him down on this list at this point is because it kind of felt like he took a step back in the company where he didn't feel like he was the most important guy in the company this year. For that reason, Okada is number 6. Now coming from that, our number 5, Maxwell Jacob Friedman. Much like I said with Rollins, much like I said with Okada, he's a guy that easily could have been number 1. The thing that hampered MJF from being at a top talent on this list, in my opinion, is the lack of in-ring matches. He's only had a handful of them this year. He took a few months off. I mean, his story is one of the most compelling stories in all of wrestling. Don't get me wrong, his rise to the top, his threatening to leave, all of that has been fantastic. However, we're talking about professional wrestling. If we were just talking about one match or one build, he'd probably be higher on the list. But because he has less matches this year than even Seth Rollins has losses or wins, that's why he's a little bit further down the list. I do think he's one of the top stories in wrestling, and we're going to cover stories in wrestling on one of these top 10s here. Spoiler. But yeah, in my opinion, if he could have had, even if he would have thrown a match on a month, if he could have had at least 10 matches on TV this year, he might have been higher. But coming from that, our number 4, the one wrestler that makes me watch AAA whenever I get a chance, Gio Del Vikingo. And at the time of this recording, he's, I think, a week or so away from making his debut in America to American audiences. The funny thing is, I picked up on watching Gio Del Vikingo by going on to Steven Larson, shout out Steven Larson, going on to one of their Twitch streams a few years ago. This was when AAA was still putting their shows on for free, and they were co-streamer, doing a watch-along with AAA, and he interested me right away. So ever since then, whenever I see there's a chance to watch a AAA pay-per-view, or I get to see some video from AAA, I go and watch it just to watch Gio Del Vikingo. And for the rest of this, I'm just going to call him Vikingo because that's a lot to say. He's probably, I believe he's only 24 or 25 right now. He's one of the best wrestlers in the world with the least amount of fanfare to him. To people that watch Lucha Libre, they absolutely know how great he is. To the rest of the world, they have no clue who the guy is. I think with his exposure that he's about to get with Game Changer Wrestling and some other companies he's working for, I think we'll start to see him popping up more. We'll probably see him in AEW at some point, or we might see him in Impact at some point. We might see WWE find a way to sign him at some point, or even New Japan. Wherever he decides to go, whatever he decides to do, I'm going to follow along because I think he's absolutely one of the best wrestlers in the world. Fantastic wrestler. To me, the parallel would be probably Will Ospreay or Kenny Omega. He's in that vein where he can do a lot of the flippy stuff while also doing a lot of the mat stuff and put on a great, compelling match. Now, coming from that, our number 3. Jay White. I mentioned it when I talked about Okada taking a backseat. This was one of the guys he took a backseat to. Jay White has put his stamp on New Japan, and this being, I hate to say it, his era. Jay was already a great wrestler coming into 2022, and he made himself one of the great wrestlers in all the world. You could argue with me, and I would listen to the argument that he's the best wrestler in the world. Everything from his promos, everything from his press conferences, his in-ring talent, the way he carries himself, he's an absolute star. I love Jay White's 2022. I think he's absolutely fantastic. He has been the highlight of New Japan Pro Wrestling all year. I absolutely adore everything he's doing there. I think it's amazing, hence why he's so high on this list. Now, coming from that, our number 2, the head of the table, Roman Reigns. Now, I did mention MJF not having a lot of matches. Roman is in a similar spot where he hasn't wrestled as much as a lot of the people on this list. However, he's also on most SmackDowns and a lot of the Raws, where even when he's not wrestling, he's still the most compelling part of their show. And there's something to be said about a guy who's over 500 days as a WWE champion at this point, when most champions last less than 100 days, last less than 3 months. Roman is absolutely the face of WWE right now. He's right up there with where John Cena was, where Steve Austin was, where The Rock was, where Shawn Michaels was. He's cemented himself as being one of the top WWE wrestlers of all time. The Bloodline's probably the most interesting thing that WWE's done in years, and he's the guy that's the catalyst for all that, much like Jay White's the catalyst for the Bullet Club. I love Roman. I love all that he's done this year, hence why he's number 2. Now, before we get into our number 1, we do a little thing here on our top 10s called the best of the rest, basically people that were considered for the list but just barely missed it. First up, Sheamus. Again, much like I've said with a couple other people, Sheamus has had a fantastic career, arguably a Hall of Fame career already. However, this year, I feel like Sheamus has stepped it up. His brutality is second to none. His matches with Gunther have been outstanding. He took the Brawling Brutes, which I thought was going to be absolutely a joke, and has made it something fun to watch. Sheamus is wrestling, and I heard him say that he's wrestling every match like it's his last, and I could definitely see that. He's going out there giving the match of his career every time he steps through the ropes. That's why it was considered for this list. Unfortunately, he didn't quite make it. Next up on the best of the rest, I mentioned him a bit ago, Will Ospreay. Again, you can make an argument that Will Ospreay deserves to be on this list. You can even make an argument that Will needs to be on the top half of this list. To me, I feel like, again, he took a backseat to Jay White. He's taken a backseat to Okada. There have been times where I feel like Will Ospreay has taken a backseat to people in his own faction, notably Jeff Cobb and Great O'Khan, where I think they've been the highlight of his faction. For that reason, I did consider him, but unfortunately, he didn't make the list. Last but not least, on the best of the rest, Sami Zayn. Look, Sami is outstanding. Everything Sami does is so interesting, so compelling. His Bloodline storyline, his match with Johnny Knoxville and the feud with Johnny Knoxville, just perfect. The guy probably has the best character in wrestling, and if he would have had some championships to put behind it, I could have probably considered him for the list. Unfortunately, he didn't, so Sami just barely missed it. Now, before we get into our number 1, if you think I put someone too high, someone too low, left someone off altogether, let me know what you think down here in the comments. Make sure you smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And with that being said, our number 1 male wrestler of the year, Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley is a guy that came into this year and probably wasn't figured into being a champion in AEW. There were a couple things that forced him into being the champion twice this year, and both times it was due to issues with CM Punk, injuries, the all-out fracas, and when given the ball, Jon Moxley ran with it. Jon Moxley was the most important wrestler on AEW. He's had his best year of his career, much like I said with a lot of the other guys. He's already cemented as a Hall of Famer, but this to me is his best year of his career. He kept AEW afloat when AEW hit some icebergs. He patched up the Titanic before it sank. He was the reason why a lot of people kept tuning in, even when their favorites were suspended or injured or had problems with the company. And his match quality has been second to none. There's a lot of arguments that he bleeds too much, he takes it to the outside too much, and there's people that just don't like it. One of my good friends, Gary, just doesn't like Jon Moxley. There's some people like that. There's some wrestlers that I just don't like. But you can't argue with success. He's had compelling storylines, whether it be the Blackpool Combat Club, his feud with MJF, his matches with CM Punk. Again, I think Jon Moxley's the best male wrestler in the world. That's why he's my number 1. Again, well, like I said before, let me know what you think. If I put someone too high, someone too low, let me know in the comments. And if you made it all the way to the end here, let me know your number 1 male wrestler in the world. Put that down here in the comments to let me know you made it to the end. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.